Our scripture this morning comes from the book of Luke, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged, and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. It sounds like exposition. It sounds like, if you've ever seen Star Wars, the beginning of the movie that has the yellow words that scroll, that give you all the background information so you know what you're getting into. That's what this reads like. It reads like the background information so you know what you're getting yourself into when you start off this Gospel of Luke thing. But there are, as usual in Scripture, what we need to do is kind of extricate ourselves from our 2014 mindset and try and enter into a first century Israelite who's reading this for the first time. And they would hear things a little differently. They would hear things like Bethlehem, the city of David. And that sounds kind of nice, because King David is the height of the Israel nation's power and the glory when they were cooperating with God. You'd think of it, but Israelites would hear Bethlehem as a backwater, one-horse town outside of Jerusalem. A bunch of hicks, a bunch of know-nothings, one stoplight town where nothing important ever happens. It's funny because we read, when we lit the candle, we read from Micah, which explicitly says, "In Bethlehem I will do something. Righteousness will spring forth from the branch of David," which we read last week. So God kind of calls his shot. And then people are surprised and astonished, and it almost goes unnoticed when it happens. And there's this weird thing, because if you were an Israelite, you were probably taught that the Messiah will come in grand glory, will be a revolutionary king who will finally kick Rome, our oppressors, out of Jerusalem, and we will be back in power again. He will probably be born to someone important. He will be of an important house, an important family. He will have power. He will have followers. He will come in glory with a sword of fire. And yet he comes humbly to a backwater town, to a nobody family, and he spends his first night on earth in a feeding trough because there's no room for him. God's ways in Scripture, it says, are higher than ours. And I believe that's true, but I often read that as God's ways are alien to us. They are confounding. They are absurd. They are irrational. They are insane. God has this way of coming at angles and directions and places that are unexpected, that are surprising and confounding. And it's because we, as much as we'd like to think different, don't really know what right and wrong and good and bad are. And we find ourselves dependent upon a God who is confounding and surprising to teach us and show us and direct us. The candle of Bethlehem is also associated with peace, typically, traditionally, in the church. And peace is, in at least scriptural Hebraic peace, it's not a passive thing. It's not calmness. It's not the absence of turbulence or violence. Peace is this active force that overcomes injustice, that overcomes death and destruction and war and violence. And it's ironic because if you any student of history, humanity's way is often to accomplish peace by conquering, by military victory, usually. You think about Charlemagne, historically, who brought peace to the known world, which was a very small part of the world at that time, but he brought peace to the known world by conquering it. Alexander the Great, he brought peace to the known world by conquering and submitting them. And this is kind of the human way, and we do this in our own personal lives. In order to find peace, in order to find forgiveness or healing or righteousness or goodness or whatever word you want to put on that squishy good thing, we find it by accomplishing, by conquering, by overcoming our addictions, by overcoming our insecurities. And this is our tendency, this is human nature, but God's ways are foreign to us. And they're higher than our own. You see, when we want to bring peace through the sword, God brings peace and deliverance and redemption through the cross. And when we expect a king to come in glory, what we get is a little baby in a feeding trough who was born to die. God's ways are confounding. This morning, I want to share with you a story that I think illustrates this, because if you're anything like me, I had a hard time connecting with this idea that God actually wants me to turn the other cheek, to love my enemy, and to submit and respect and treat the people who are evil against me and against goodness in this world with love. Those ideas are absurd, and I had a hard time believing that was even possible, that victory or redemption and goodness and justice and peace could even come through that. And then I heard this story. It's the best kind of story because it's a true story. The year was 1983. And in 1983, country music was beginning to make a comeback. And a man by the name of Daryl Davis joined a country band because he was a gigging musician, and when you're a professional musician, you don't get to play what you want, you play what's popular. And so he joined a country band, and he was the only black guy in the band, and in many of the places they played, he was oftentimes the only black person in the entire club. And in Maryland, there's a truck stop, and in that truck stop there's a motel, and at the bottom of that motel there's a little place called the Silver Dollar Lounge. And that place in 1983 was whites only. Black people did not go to that club. And so Daryl finished his set. He was a very good piano player, and he crossed the bandstand to join his bandmates, and when he went to go sit down, he felt a hand on his shoulder. And he turned around to see who it was, and it was one of the patrons of the bar, and he was saying, "I really love y'all's music. You guys are amazing." And then he said to Daryl, "I'll tell you what, I ain't never heard no black fella play the piano like Jerry Lee Lewis before." And naively and innocently, Daryl said, "Well, that's funny because you know where Jerry Lee Lewis learned to play piano like that, don't you?" And he said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, he learned it from listening to and studying black blues and boogie-woogie piano." And he says, No, that's not true. Jerry Lee Lewis invented that style of music." And Daryl said, "Listen, I've known Jerry Lee Lewis since I was 13 years old. He's a personal friend of mine, and he has explicitly told me that that's where he got his style from." And the guy said, No, you refused. And they kind of went back and forth, but it was jovial and it was friendly. And eventually he says, "Daryl, I'd like to buy you a drink." And Daryl wasn't a drinker, but he did agree to have a glass of cranberry juice, and he joined him at his table, at his friend's table. And they were carrying on and laughing and having a good time all night. And eventually this guy kind of speaks up again, and he says, "I'll tell you what, I ain't never had no drink with no black fella before." And Daryl said, "Well, this is certainly a night of firsts for you, isn't it?" And he said, "Why is that?" And the guy kind of hung his head. He looked at the table and shook it. And his friend elbowed him in the ribs, and he said, "Come on, tell him. He looked up at Daryl and he said, "I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan." Daryl laughed. Daryl didn't believe him. He thought he was giving him a hard time because of the Jerry Lee Lewis thing. And so the man insisted, and he pulled out a card, and he handed it to Daryl, and he looked at it, and there was on the card a white-robed man on horseback, and on the other side there was a white cross with a red circle around it, and a red dot in the middle. It's called the blood dot emblem. And Daryl recognized those symbols, and his laughter faded away, and the tone got a lot more serious. The man said, I want you to keep that card, and next time you're in town, give me a call. I want to bring my friends to come hear your band play. So Daryl, they were on a 6-week rotation. Daryl had 6 weeks to really think about where this guy was coming from, if he was sincere, if he was genuine, if this was a trap, if there was some shoe that was going to drop. And so eventually, after a long time of really considering what was going on, he decided he was going to give this guy a call. So about Wednesday or Thursday, he gave him a call and he said, hey, we're going to be playing at the Silver Dollar Lounge this weekend. You told me to come and let you know when we're coming, so here you go, you're invited to come. And true to his word, he brought his friends, who were all Klan members, to come hear this black pianist play like Jerry Lee Lewis. And some were more polite than others. Some were engaging and shook his hand and met him and introduced themselves, and some stood off to the side and were a little more put off by the idea. But nothing violent or terrible happened. They all just kind of danced and enjoyed the music and carried on, and this became a regular thing. For the entire year of 1983, every 6 weeks, Daryl would call this guy, let him know they were playing at the Silver Dollar Lounge, and he would bring his friends. Well, the end of 1983 came, and Daryl decided that he wanted to take up other styles of music. He wanted to get back to rock and roll and blues, and so he quit that band and went on to other gigs. And he kind of lost contact with this friend of his. But because of that experience, Daryl was a professional musician, but his passion was in racial relationships and racism. And he began to study. He began to gather as much material as he could on the Nazi Party, on white supremacists, on black supremacists, on anti-Semitism, on neo-Nazism, and he researched, and eventually, in trying to work this out, he came to this place where he just could not fathom the idea that someone who's never met him could hate him and wish him harm based on nothing other than his skin tone. And in trying to wrestle with this idea, he realized that the best way to come to grips with it in himself was to help other people come to grips with it. So he decided that he was going to write a book. So he set out to write this book, and as he was deciding where he was going to start, he remembered his relationship with this guy who was a member of the Klan, and he decided that the Ku Klux Klan was the best place to start. So he decided to look up his friend. And when he looked him up, he couldn't find his phone number. All he found was an address. And so he showed up one night in this guy's apartment, unannounced, and he knocked on the door. And when he answered, he recognized him. He said, Daryl! He stepped out of the hallway and he looked down one side or the other, see if he was with anybody or if anybody saw him come. And when he stepped out, Daryl stepped in. And he said, well, Daryl, what brings you here? Are you still playing? He said, yeah, I'm still playing piano. Are you still in the Klan? And he said, oh, no, and told him some story about it. And they said, well, do you have, any of your robes or your hood or anything like that? And he said, no, it turns out that he had failed to pay his dues on his robes. And they had come and repossessed his robes and kicked him out. And so Daryl said, do you know a man by the name of Roger Kelly? He said, yeah, I know Roger Kelly. Roger Kelly was the Grand Wizard for the Ku Klux Klan of the state of Maryland. Grand Wizard, it's their hierarchy, it's the terminology for their state leader. And he says, I need you to put me in touch with him. No, I can't do that. He says, come on, you're not in the Klan anymore. What are they going to do? He says, Daryl, you don't understand. These are serious people. It's dangerous. And Daryl continued, and he pressed, and he asked, and he begged, and eventually he handed over Roger Kelly's phone number and home address with two things to say. He said, first, do not tell Roger Kelly where you got this information. And second, do not visit Roger Kelly at home. He will kill you. So Daryl left with his information, and wanting to set up an interview, he employed his band's booking secretary, a lady by the name of Mary. And he told Mary, all right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to call and let Roger Kelly know that I'm writing a book I'd like his side of the story about the Ku Klux Klan, but do not volunteer that I'm black. And don't lie to him if he asks, but do not give him reason to ask. So Mary calls and asks him if he's open to the interview, and sure enough, he agrees to the interview. So they set up a meeting for the motel room above the Silver Dollar Lounge for 5:15 on Sunday afternoon. And they get there early, and Daryl has time to sit and think about what's going to happen when Roger Kelly sees that he's being interviewed by a black author. And he thinks, is he going to be violent? Is he going to walk away? Or will he continue with the interview? Right about that time, there's a knock on the door. Mary goes and answers, and in walks Roger Kelly and his Nighthawk. Nighthawk is a Ku Klux Klan terminology for a bodyguard. A man in full camouflage camp combat boots and a sidearm on his waist. And there's Daryl and Mary armed with nothing but a bucket of ice and soda. And when he steps in the room, both he and Roger Kelly startle when they see that Daryl's black. And before they can react, he stands up, he walks across the room, and he extends his hand. And he says, "Mr. Kelly, my name's Daryl. Why don't you come in and have a seat?" And he shakes his hand. Before he sits down, Roger Kelly says, "Do you have some kind of identification?" He says, "Oh, yeah, sure." He pulls out his driver's license and hands it to him. And Mr. Kelly reads his driver's license, and he says, "Oh, Daryl, you live at," and then announces his address out loud. If you're a black man in the 80s, the last thing you want to hear is the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan announcing that he now knows where you sleep. And it was unnerving. It was scary. But not wishing to betray his unnervedness, not wishing to give ground in this initial interaction, Daryl said, "Well, yes, I do, Mr. Kelly. And you live at," and then announced his address right back at him. And that was the beginning of the interview. And he invited him in, and they both sat down and began the interview. And it went in a generally respectful tone, with the occasional table pounding for emphasis on points. But every once in a while, Roger Kelly would ask, would say something along the lines of, "Well, in the Bible it says," and then Daryl would reach down and grab his Bible and say, "Would you kindly show me where?" And every once in a while, the tape would run out, and Daryl would reach down and pull out his tape and change the cassette, or the batteries would need to be changed. He'd reach down. Every time he reached down into his bag, the Nighthawk, at attention, standing there, would raise his hand to his pistol holster. So it's a little tense. There's a little bit of tension in the room. And at a particularly tense time in the conversation, when Daryl was making an emphatic point, there was a sudden, sharp, loud, and Daryl shot up from his chair, and he put both hands on the table. He was startled, and his heart was racing, his mind was racing, and all he could hear in the back of his head was, "Roger Kelly will kill you." And he's thinking, do I have to fight for my life now? Am I have to tackle this armed escort and get us both out of here, him and Mary? And as he's staring Roger Kelly in the eye with a look that says, "What was that? What's going on?" he sees the same look being shot back at him. "What was that? What's going on? What have you done?" And the Nighthawk's got his hand on his pistol, and he's looking at both of them. "Well, what's going on? What's going on?" And suddenly, in this tense moment of silence, the sound repeats itself. And all eyes in the room turn to the bucket of ice and soda sitting underneath the window. The ice had melted and the soda was shifting. And they all laughed at their fear, at their ignorance. And from that moment on, the interview was a lot less tense. In fact, the interview went so well that at the end of it, Roger Kelly pulled out his Klan card and gave it to Daryl and said, "Stay in touch." And Daryl, on his drive home with Mary, couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. He didn't come to be friends with the Ku Klux Klan. He came to do research. But as he was talking to it, he said to Mary, "It's a shame because I actually like Roger Kelly, the man. I don't like what he stands for. In fact, I hate it. But aside from our differences on race, we actually agree on more than we disagree on. He said, we both want to get drugs off the street. We both want better education for our children. We both want fair pay for honest, hard work. We both want good things for our people. So the next time Daryl was in town, he gave Roger Kelly a call. And he said, my band's playing at this place. You're welcome to come. And Roger Kelly, with the Nighthawk, came. He heard it play. And he started this constant, every time he was in town, inviting him out, and every time Roger Kelly came. And eventually, over the years, Daryl started inviting him to his house. And when he invited him to his house, he also invited Jewish and Hispanic and every minority friend he could find, so that Roger Kelly would know that Daryl was not the exception to the rule. And he came. And eventually he started coming without the Nighthawk. And eventually, Roger Kelly started inviting Daryl Davis to his house. And over the years, Roger Kelly was promoted from the Grand Wizard to the Imperial Wizard, which is the national leader of the Ku Klux Klan. And he started inviting Daryl Davis to Klan rallies. So you can imagine this. Daryl went. You can imagine this. The Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan holding a Klan rally with his honored guest, his black friend. It caught some attention of local news, and then it caught the attention of national news. In fact, we've got a recording from a news broadcast, and then you'll get a chance to hear Daryl Davis's own words as soon as it's done. So take a listen.
Welcome to this final hour of CNN Sunday Morning. Friendship can transcend all kinds of boundaries.
Just look at us. And two men in the Washington area are showing that even an African-American man and a member of the Ku Klux Klan can find common ground. CNN's Carl Rochelle reports.
Davis is one of the few African-Americans you will ever find attending a KKK rally. More than attending, he is welcome.
I got more respect for that black man than I do you white people out there. We get to know one another, we do different things, It hasn't changed my views about the Klan, because my views on the Klan's been pretty much cemented in my mind for years. And I believe in separation of the races. I believe that's in the best interest of all races. I'm a tolerant in the hell back, because I believe in what he stands for and he believes what I stand for. Sometimes we don't agree with everything, but at least he respects me to sit down and listen to me. And I respect him to sit down and listen to him.
The strange relationship of a KKK wizard and his black buddy. In Washington, I'm Carl Rochelle.
You have an adversary, an opponent with an opposing point of view. Give that person a platform, regardless of how extreme it may be. And believe me, I've heard some things so extreme at these rallies, they'll cut you to the bone. If you agree with them, great, no problem. If you don't agree with them, that's fine too. You challenge them, but you don't challenge them rudely or violently. You do it politely and intelligently. And when you do things that way, chances are they will reciprocate and give you a platform. So he and I will sit down and listen to one another. Over a period of time, that cement that he talked about that held his ideas together began to get cracks in it. And then it began to crumble. And then it fell apart.
During one of Roger Kelly's visits, he brought a box, a package to Daryl. And Daryl said, well, what's this? He said, open it. And he untied it and opened up the package. He saw in there the robes of the Imperial Wizard of the KKK. Roger Kelly had a change in heart. He had left the Klan. And he was giving his robes to his friend Daryl. Through that friendship, Daryl became friends with two other Maryland State Ku Klux Klan leaders, a man by the name of Robert White and a man by the name of Chester Doles. And over the course of their friendship, both of those men came to give their robes to Daryl. Daryl got a lot of criticism. He got called a lot of nasty names. He was called Uncle Tom. He was called an Oreo. He was chewed up one side and down the other by the NAACP. Said, we worked so hard to get one step forward, and now you're sitting with our enemies and taking us 20 steps back. And to win that argument, all Daryl had to do was point to his closet. where hung the end of the Ku Klux Klan in the state of Maryland. Because of his efforts, there is no longer an active chapter in that state. Unless you think that Daryl Davis's story is the exception to the rule, I'll invite you to sit him at the same table as Martin Luther King Jr., who accomplished amazingly great things through nonviolence. To sit him at the same table as Gandhi, who took on the British Empire for the nation of India using nonviolence. And to sit him at the same table as Jesus, our Christ, who defeated sin and death without lifting a finger, who surrendered and submitted to his torturers, who loved and respected his enemies to the point of death, but whose eye was so clearly on the end, so clearly on the prize, that he knew his victory would be guaranteed by his Father. This morning is Communion Sunday. It is our human tendency to want to fight. We choose the tree of knowledge of good and evil so that we can know what's right and wrong, that we can accomplish our own righteousness, our own salvation, so that we can be masters of our own destiny. But the problem with that is that we cannot overcome our addictions. We cannot overcome our desperate insecurities. We cannot overcome the wounds that have been left by our past. We, under our own efforts, are hopelessly lost to that. But God's ways, which are in fact higher than ours, God's ways are to surrender. God's ways are to love and respect, even when you are not being loved and respected. So as we come to the table this morning and receive the Eucharist, I invite you to come with your hands open as a sign that we do not take. We do not accomplish our own salvation, but instead, we are the recipients of a grace that comes humbly, that comes to die, that comes to lead us to our own cross where we may surrender and find healing and salvation. I hope that you will come with a heart ready to receive.